Welcome, dear listeners, to Mystery at Midnight. I'm your host, Alistair Gray. Pull up a velvet armchair, pour yourself a brandy, and let the fog of 1920s London envelop you. Tonight, we present an original Hercule Poirot tale, The Deadly Weapon Crime, a locked room impossibility that baffled Scotland Yard until he arrived. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? A rainy cottage in Devon, a subway in New York? I read every single one. Chapter 1, Introduction and Setup. The fog of a November evening in 1927 clung to the pavements of Victoria Station like a guilty secret. Hercule Poirot, only just arrived from the boat train, paused beneath the great iron roof and adjusted the precise knot of his tie. The little Belgian's patent leather shoes gleamed despite the drizzle. His mustaches, waxed to symmetrical perfection, caught the gaslight in twin points of pride. He inhaled the familiar London air, coal smoke, wet stone, and the faint tang of the Thames, and permitted himself a small, satisfied sigh. 3 impossible murders in Cairo had been neatly folded away, and now the metropolis welcomed him home. A liveried chauffeur stood beside a gleaming Daimler, holding a placard that read simply, Mr. H. Poirot, Urgent, Ashbrook House. The man's face was long, his gloves immaculate. Poirot noted the absence of engine grime beneath the fingernails. Curious, a chauffeur who did not drive, or one who scrubbed with unusual diligence. He filed the detail away, as one might slip a theater ticket into a waistcoat pocket. The drive north through the city was silent save for the rhythmic swish of wipers. Street lamps slid past in golden halos, each illuminating a fragment of London life. A flower seller closing her barrow, 2 constables sharing a cigarette, a newsboy shouting headlines about the latest Wall Street flutter. Poirot watched it all, with the calm detachment of a man who had long ago learned that the world was rarely as it seemed. Ashbrook House rose on the edge of Hampstead Heath like a monument to Victorian certainty. Built in 1903 by Sir Reginald Ashbrook, munitions baron, patriot, and collector of anything that could kill at a distance, the mansion combined Gothic turrets with the austere lines of a fortress. Yew hedges, clipped to knife-edge precision, swallowed sound and light alike. Gravel crunched beneath the Daimler's tires as it halted before a porte-cochere whose pillars were carved with laurel wreaths and, less predictably, crossed rifles. The front door opened before the chauffeur could lift the knocker. A butler, tall, sepulchral, and named Poirot would later learn, Carstairs, bowed with the solemnity of an undertaker. "This way, sir. The family is assembled in the grand hall." The hall lived up to its name. A double staircase swept upward beneath a vaulted ceiling painted with scenes of classical warfare. Suits of armor stood sentinel along the walls. Their empty visors reflected the flicker of a dozen electric chandeliers recently converted from gas. Between the staircases hung a portrait of Sir Reginald in the uniform of a colonel of yeomanry, his eyes hard as shrapnel. 6 people waited beneath that portrait, arranged with the awkward formality of a tableau in a wax museum. Lady Eleanor Ashbrook stood at the center, a study in black velvet and restrained grief. At 48, she retained the bone structure of a Renaissance Madonna, though her mouth had settled into a line that suggested perpetual disapproval. Her fingers worried a jet rosary. The beads clicked softly, counting sins or seconds. Poirot could not yet tell which. To her left lounged Captain Marcus Ashbrook, the only son and heir, 28, bronzed from service in India. He wore his dinner jacket with the careless grace of a man who expected doors to open and women to sigh. A Webley revolver rode his hip in a polished leather holster. An affectation, Poirot thought, though one that might prove significant. Dr. Felix Harrow hovered nearby, a thin man of 55 whose nervous fingers bore the permanent yellow stain of iodine. His eyes darted like minnows. His Adam's apple bobbed above a collar that seemed half a size too tight. He clutched a small black bag as though it contained the secrets of life and death in equal measure. Miss Daphne Vale, Lady Eleanor's secretary, completed the inner circle. 25 bobbed hair as sharp as her gaze. She wore a green wool dress that clung to fashionable angles. A silver propelling pencil was tucked behind one ear. Her shorthand notebook rested against her hip like a weapon she had not yet decided to draw. Mr. Percival Finch stood a little apart, clutching a briefcase to his chest as a nun might clutch a missile. Sir Reginald's former business partner was 62, portly and florid, his waistcoat strained at its buttons, each one a small cry for mercy. Sweat gleamed on his bald pate, despite the chill seeping through the ill-fitting windows. Finally, Mrs. Graves, the housekeeper, materialized from the shadows beside a marble bust of Minerva. 50 years old, ramrod straight, her face was a closed hymnal. She wore the black bombazine of her calling, starched to crackling perfection. Poirot noted that her apron, though spotless, carried a single loose thread of emerald green. Poirot bowed with continental flourish. Mesdames et messieurs, I am Hercule Poirot. You have summoned me with urgency. I am, as always, at your service. Lady Eleanor's voice cut through the hush like a shard of flint striking steel. My husband is about to be murdered, Monsieur Poirot, and no one in this house must be allowed to prevent it. For once, the great detective's composure flickered. His eyebrows ascended a precise millimeter. Pardon, madame, you wish a murder to proceed unhindered? Captain Marcus gave a bark of laughter that held no humor. She means the old man has decided to top himself tonight. In the gun room, at 11 o'clock sharp, door bolted from the inside, key in his pocket, the whole theatrical performance. Dr. Harrow's voice trembled. He has taken a cyanide capsule, or so he claims. But the door is locked, the windows barred since the war, and the only chimney is narrower than a drainpipe. He says it is his right, his final act of control. Poirot's gaze traveled slowly across the 6 faces. Fear, anger, calculation, resignation. He read them all as easily as the headlines on the newsboy's placard. A suicide announced in advance, he murmured. Curious, one might almost say rehearsed. Lady Eleanor's rosary clicked faster. He sent for you, Monsieur Poirot, though none of us know why. The note arrived by taxicab an hour ago. She produced a single sheet of heavy cream paper from her sleeve. The message was typed in capital letters. To Hercule Poirot, stop the crime if you can. Gun room, 11 p.m. Do not be late. R.A. Poirot turned the paper to the light. The watermark was unmistakable. Ashbrook crest, lion rampant, but the typewriter's E was slightly misaligned, the top bar fatter than its fellows. A detail, always a detail. Lead me to this gun room, he said quietly. Mrs. Graves inclined her head and glided ahead, her keys jangling softly at her waist. The others followed in uneasy procession. Their footsteps echoed along a corridor lined with oil paintings of forgotten admirals and colonial governors, each face stern with the certainty of empire. The gun room lay at the far end of the west wing. Its door was heavy oak, bound with iron, the lock a fortress in miniature. A brass plate read, Sir Reginald Ashbrook, Private. Beneath it, a smaller sign in fresh red paint. Do not disturb until midnight. Poirot tested the handle. Locked. He pressed his ear to the wood. Silence. Absolute, oppressive silence. Captain Marcus glanced at his wristwatch. 10:43. 17 minutes until curtain. Dr. Harrow mopped his brow with a handkerchief that smelled faintly of ether. He was quite explicit. No one is to enter before the clock strikes 12. After that, well, the will is clear. Miss Vale's pencil scratched across her notebook. He rewrote it yesterday. I typed the fair copy myself. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And the previous will, mademoiselle? Burned. In the library grate. I watched the ashes myself. Mr. Finch cleared his throat. There may be irregularities in the estate. Sir Reginald discovered certain discrepancies in the accounts. He was most upset. Lady Eleanor's rosary snapped. Jet beads scattered across the parquet like black hailstones. Somewhere in the house, a clock began to chime the 3/4 hour. The sound rolled down the corridor, mournful and inevitable. Chapter 2. The Crime Discovered. The grandfather clock in the entrance hall struck 11 with the solemn authority of a judge passing sentence. Each chime reverberated through the west wing, growing fainter as it reached the locked door of the gun room. Poirot stood motionless, one gloved hand still pressed to the oak panels, the other cradling the typed summons as though it were a fragile butterfly. The shadow he had glimpsed beneath the door had vanished as suddenly as it appeared. No sound followed, no footstep, no sigh, no metallic click of a revolver being cocked, only the oppressive hush of a house holding its breath. Captain Marcus consulted his wristwatch again and swore under his breath. 5 minutes passed. The old man always was punctual to the second. He raised a fist as if to hammer on the door, then thought better of it and let his hand fall. The Webley at his hip caught the lamplight, its barrel polished to a murderous gleam. Lady Eleanor had retrieved her scattered rosary beads one by one, her movements precise, almost mechanical. Now she clutched the reconstituted string so tightly that the whites of her knuckles showed like bone through parchment. He said midnight, she repeated, as though the words were a charm against chaos. We are to wait until midnight. Dr. Harrow's Adam's apple performed a nervous jig. Medically speaking, cyanide acts within minutes. If he took the capsule at 11, he left the sentence unfinished, but his eyes slid involuntarily to the black bag at his feet. Miss Vale's pencil hovered above her notebook, poised yet immobile. A single droplet of ink trembled at the nib, then fell, blotting the page like a tear. He was alive at 10:45, she said quietly. I took him a fresh pot of coffee. He was sitting at the desk, writing. The revolver was in the top drawer. He showed it to me, said it had been with him at Spy & Cop. Mr. Finch shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the leather briefcase creaking in his grip. Perhaps we should telephone the police now. Save time. Mrs. Graves materialized from the shadows as silently as mist. Sir Reginald's instructions were explicit, sir. No authorities until the clock strikes 12. The door remains sealed. Her voice carried the finality of a coffin lid closing. Poirot straightened, his expression unreadable. And yet, mesdames et messieurs, the shadow moved. Someone or something was in that room after mademoiselle left the coffee. He tapped the door gently with his cane. The bolt is on the inside, yes? Thrown by Sir Reginald himself? Captain Marcus nodded. I watched him do it. 10:55 precisely. He opened the door a crack, told us all to clear off, then slammed it shut. I heard the bolt slide home, clear as a rifle shot. Poirot's gaze traveled along the corridor. The walls were paneled in dark walnut. A single gas sconce flickered, casting elongated shadows that danced like guilty accomplices. At the far end, a narrow window looked out onto the heath, where the yew hedges stood black against a sky the color of wet slate. Rain had begun to fall, soft and relentless, drumming on the glass like impatient fingers. Very well, Poirot said. We wait, but Hercule Poirot does not wait idly. He knelt once more, this time producing a small electric torch from his overcoat pocket. The beam cut a clean circle through the gloom beneath the door. Dust motes floated in the light, nothing else moved. He adjusted the angle, revealing a thin strip of Persian carpet that ran the length of the corridor. A single scuff mark marred its intricate pattern. Fresh, the nap crushed in the direction of the gun room. Curious, he murmured. A shoe print, yet no corresponding mark leaving the room, as though the visitor arrived but did not depart. The minutes crawled. At 11:15 the rain intensified, lashing the window panes with a sound like thrown gravel. Dr. Harrow began to pace, his footsteps muffled by the carpet, yet somehow louder than the storm. Miss Vale closed her notebook with a snap and tucked the pencil behind her ear. Lady Eleanor's rosary resumed its rhythmic click. Mr. Finch opened his briefcase, peered inside, then closed it again with a guilty start. At 11:25 Captain Marcus could bear it no longer. To hell with midnight, he growled, and hammered on the door with the butt of his revolver. Father, open up! His voice cracked on the second syllable, betraying the schoolboy beneath the soldier. Silence. He hammered again. Sir Reginald Ashbrook, this is your son. Open the door or I'll break it down. The oak remained impassive. Somewhere in the house another clock began to chime the half-hour, slightly out of synchrony with the hall clock, creating a discordant echo that set teeth on edge. Poirot placed a restraining hand on the captain's arm. Patience, mon capitaine. Violence solves nothing. He pressed his ear to the door once more. This time he heard it. A faint, rhythmic sound like the ticking of a pocket watch amplified 100-fold, or perhaps the beating of a heart. At 11:35, the storm reached its crescendo. Thunder rolled overhead close enough to rattle the window panes. Lightning illuminated the corridor in stark white, freezing every face in a tableau of apprehension. In that instant, Poirot saw it, a thin wisp of smoke curling beneath the door, acrid and unmistakable. "Cordite," he said sharply. "A firearm has been discharged." Captain Marcus needed no further encouragement. He threw his shoulder against the door. The oak shuddered but held. Again, crack! Timber groaned. On the third attempt, the lock splintered and the door swung inward, revealing the gun room in all its lethal grandeur. The chamber was exactly as Miss Vale had described, walls lined with glass-fronted cabinets displaying rifles, pistols, sabers, and exotic weapons from every corner of the empire. A Zulu assegai hung beside a Japanese tanto. A Maxim gun squatted on a tripod like a malevolent toad. In the center stood a mahogany desk the size of a billiard table, its surface bare save for a silver inkstand, a blotter, and a single sheet of paper weighted by a brass cartridge case. Sir Reginald Ashbrook sat behind the desk, slumped forward, his head resting on his forearms, as though he had simply fallen asleep over his correspondence. A neat, dark hole pierced his right temple. A trickle of blood had traced a path across the blotter and pooled beside the cartridge case. In his right hand he clutched a Webley service revolver, its barrel still warm to the touch. The room reeked of burnt powder and something sweeter, bitter almonds. But the door had been bolted from the inside. The heavy iron bolt was thrown across, its tongue seated firmly in the keep. The windows, two narrow lancets set high in the wall, were barred with iron rods thick as a man's thumb, each bar soldered into the stonework. The fireplace was a mere slit, its chimney lined with soot and far too narrow for human passage. And on the desk, beside the body, lay a second sheet of paper, typed like the summons in capital letters, "To whom it may concern, I take my own life at 11 p.m. The weapon is my old service revolver. Do not disturb the room. R.A." The hall clock struck 11:40 as Poirot stepped carefully into the room, avoiding the widening pool of blood. He lifted the typed note with a handkerchief. The paper was warm from the desk lamp. The E was misaligned, exactly as in the summons. Dr. Harrow followed, kneeling beside the body with professional detachment. "Instantaneous," he pronounced. "Entry wound right temple, exit left. Powder burns consistent with contact shot." He opened Sir Reginald's waistcoat and withdrew a small glass phial from the inner pocket. The capsule inside was intact, its wax seal unbroken. Cyanide untouched. Captain Marcus stared at his father's corpse, the color draining from his sun-bronzed face. He shot himself. Door bolted, windows barred, key in his pocket. It's suicide, plain as day. Poirot's eyes gleamed like winter stars. "Non, mon ami, observe." He took the revolver from Sir Reginald's limp fingers. Left hand, he noted, though the wound was on the right temple. "Your father was left-handed, yes? Yet the gun is in his right hand. The exit wound suggests a shot from right to left. And the bolt," he gestured to the door, "thrown from the inside. But the key..." He reached into Sir Reginald's waistcoat pocket and withdrew a Yale key on a silver chain. "The only key, you said?" Miss Vale nodded, her face pale as parchment. "He kept it on him always. Said the gun-room was his sanctuary." Poirot turned the key over in his palm. A speck of blood marred its bow, fresh, still wet. "Then explain this, mademoiselle. The door was locked from the outside when we arrived. The bolt is inside, yet here is the key in the pocket of a dead man. And the shadow. I saw..." He pointed to the scuff mark on the carpet. "Someone entered this room after you left the coffee and left no trace of departure." He moved to the windows. The bars were intact, the latches fastened. He examined the fireplace, soot undisturbed. Finally, he stood beneath the chandelier. A heavy brass affair hung with crystal drops, and looked up. A faint circular mark marred the ceiling plaster, directly above the desk. "Impossible," Captain Marcus whispered. "He locked himself in and shot himself. What other explanation is there?" Poirot's smile was thin as a scalpel. Precisely, mon capitaine. It is impossible, and yet Sir Reginald is dead. Therefore, we are confronted not with suicide, but with murder. Murder in a room locked from the inside by a killer who vanished like smoke. Outside, the storm raged on, thunder echoing the gunshot that had shattered the silence of Ashbrook House. Inside, the little Belgian detective surveyed the scene with the calm of a man who had just been handed the most exquisite puzzle of his career. The game, as they say, was afoot. Chapter 3. Investigation begins. Poirot lingered in the gun-room long after the local constable had been summoned and the household banished to the library. He moved with the deliberate grace of a watchmaker, assembling a mechanism no one else could see. First, he photographed the scene with a pocket Kodak, flash powder blooming like brief summer lightning. Then he measured the distance from desk to door, 14 feet 2 inches, the angle of the bullet's exit, 23 degrees downward, the diameter of the powder burns, 3/4 of an inch. Each figure was murmured into a small Morocco-bound notebook in his neat, continental hand. Only when the room had yielded every secret it was prepared to give did he permit the others to re-enter. They filed in under the watchful eye of Inspector Japp, summoned from Scotland Yard despite Mrs. Graves's protests about proper procedure. Japp, a bulldog in a bowler hat, greeted Poirot with the resigned affection of a man who had lost too many cases to the little Belgian. "Suicide, is it?" Japp grunted, surveying the bolted door. "Clean as you like. Door locked, key in pocket, note on desk, open and shut." Poirot's moustaches quivered with indignation. "Open, perhaps. Shut? Never. Observe, my friend, the contradictions." He led Japp through the anomalies. The right-handed wound on a left-handed man, the intact cyanide capsule, the scuff mark that entered but did not leave, the blood-flecked key. Japp scratched his chin, unconvinced but listening. The household was assembled in the library, an oak-paneled cavern lined with first editions no one had read since the Boer War. A fire crackled in the atom grate, casting restless shadows across leather bindings and the strained faces of the suspects. Poirot took the central position before the fireplace, his small frame somehow dominating the room. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "we proceed with order and method. Each of you will tell Poirot where you were between 10:45, when Mademoiselle Vale delivered the coffee, and 11:40, when the door was forced. You will speak the truth. Hercule Poirot will know if you do not." He began with Lady Eleanor. She sat ramrod straight in a high-backed chair, the repaired rosary coiled in her lap like a sleeping serpent. "I was in the drawing-room," she said, voice steady as winter frost, "reading the Evening Post. Carstairs brought me a letter from my solicitor at 10:50. I remained there until the gunshot, though I heard nothing over the storm." Poirot noted the faint tremor in her left hand, the one that had snapped the rosary. "And the new will, madame? You knew its contents?" Her eyes flicked to Miss Vale, then away. "Reginald showed it to me yesterday. He was reducing my allowance. Said the estate could no longer support my frivolities." Captain Marcus sprawled in an armchair, boots propped on a priceless Aubusson rug. "I was in the billiard room with Finch, knocking balls about. Heard the storm, nothing else. Father and I hadn't spoken civilly in weeks. He threatened to cut me off entirely if I didn't settle my Calcutta debts. £50,000, old boy. Rather a lot of balls to knock about." Mr. Finch nodded vigorously, sweat beading on his forehead despite the draft from the windows. "Quite right. We played 3 frames. Marcus won the first, I the second. At 11 o'clock Carstairs brought whiskey. We were still at table when the door was broken down." Poirot's gaze lingered on Finch's trembling fingers. "And the discrepancies in the accounts, monsieur? Sir Reginald discovered them?" Finch's jowls quivered. "A misunderstanding. War profits are complex. Reginald was overwrought." Dr. Harrow stood by the window, staring out at the rain-lashed heath. "I was in the dispensary, preparing Sir Reginald's evening dose of digitalis. He had a weak heart, angina pectoris. I heard nothing until Captain Ashbrook's shouting." Poirot turned to him sharply. "You are certain the capsule was cyanide, not perhaps a placebo?" Harrow flushed. "I filled it myself this morning. Prussic acid. Pure. Enough to kill an ox." Miss Vale sat at a small secretaire, her notebook open but untouched. After delivering the coffee, I returned to the morning room. I was typing correspondence, letters to Christie's about the Zulu assegai collection. The typewriter is there. The ribbon is fresh. I heard the clock strike 11, then nothing until the commotion. Mrs. Graves stood by the door, arms folded across her bombazine bosom. I was in the still room, preparing tomorrow's menus. The kitchen maid can confirm. At 11 o'clock I locked the silver pantry. Routine. I heard the storm, nothing more. Poirot paced slowly, his patent leather shoes silent on the Turkish carpet. 6 people, 6 alibis, yet one of you or more entered the gunroom after 10:45 and left no trace. Let us examine the physical evidence. He produced a small envelope and spilled its contents onto the blotter. The blood-flecked key, the torn scrap of green velvet caught in the window latch, the smudged fingerprint on the bolt, not Sir Reginald's, and, most intriguing, a single brass cartridge case found beneath the desk. Its primer struck but no bullet in the chamber. Japp whistled. Misfire or deliberate, Poirot said. The revolver held 6 rounds, 1 fired into Sir Reginald, 5 remain. Yet this cartridge, he held it to the light, was ejected manually. Someone loaded, fired, then ejected a second round to confuse the count. He moved to the fireplace and pointed to the narrow chimney. Too small for escape. The windows, he gestured, bars soldered in 1919, latches undisturbed. The door bolted from within, key in pocket. He paused beneath the chandelier. And the ceiling, Captain Marcus followed his gaze. There's nothing up there but plaster and cobwebs. Poirot smiled. We shall see. He dragged a leather wing chair beneath the chandelier and climbed atop it, his small frame steady as a cat. His fingers traced the circular mark in the plaster. A faint seam appeared. He pressed. A small panel swung downward on concealed hinges, revealing a dark cavity no larger than a hatbox. Mon Dieu, Lady Eleanor breathed. Poirot reached inside and withdrew a coil of fishing line, fine as spider silk, and a tiny brass pulley no bigger than a sixpence. The mechanism begins to reveal itself, but not the whole. He descended and faced the room. Now the motives. Lady Eleanor, disinheritance. Captain Marcus, debts. Monsieur Finch, embezzlement. Dr. Harrow. He paused, noting the physician's sudden pallor. A secret from the past, perhaps? Mademoiselle Vale, burned papers in the grate. Madame Graves, your son dismissed for theft. Each of you had reason, but only one had opportunity. Dr. Harrow took a step forward. This is absurd. The room was locked. From the inside, Poirot finished. Yet the killer entered and left without disturbing bolt or bars. The fishing line, the pulley, the misfired cartridge, these are pieces of a puzzle, but the picture is not yet complete. He turned to Japp. Inspector, seal the gunroom. No one enters without my permission. Tomorrow we examine the attic above, the cellars below, and every inch of plaster between. Somewhere, the killer has left a signature. As the household dispersed under Japp's watchful eye, Poirot lingered by the fireplace. He picked up the brass cartridge case and rolled it between his fingers. The primer was deeply indented, too deep for the Webley's firing pin. He sniffed it, not cordite, but something sharper. Nitrocellulose, perhaps. A different weapon entirely. Chapter 4. Clues and Red Herrings. Dawn crept over Hampstead Heath like a guilty lover, pale and reluctant. The storm had spent itself in the night, leaving the yew hedges dripping and the gravel paths slick with mud. Inside Ashbrook House, the air was thick with the smell of wet wool, coal smoke, and unspoken accusations. Poirot had not slept. His eyes were bright as a terrier's, his mustaches waxed to lethal points. He stood in the gunroom with Inspector Japp and a yawning police photographer, directing the placement of arc lamps that turned the chamber into a stage set for tragedy. Every surface, Poirot instructed. The cabinets, the desk drawers, the very grains of soot in the chimney. Nothing escapes. The photographer's magnesium flashes popped like distant gunfire, freezing the scene in stark white tableau. Japp scratched his head. Still looks like suicide to me, Poirot. Door bolted, key in pocket, note on desk. You're chasing shadows. Shadows, mon ami, have substance when the light is correct. Poirot knelt beside the desk and pointed to a faint scratch on the mahogany surface no longer than a matchstick. Observe. The varnish is disturbed. Something was affixed here, temporarily, with adhesive, and here, he indicated a second mark near the inkstand. Another, a rectangle, perhaps 6 inches by 4. He opened the top drawer. Inside lay the expected clutter of a soldier's life: regimental badges, a dog-eared copy of Kipling, a box of 455 cartridges. But one cartridge was different. Brass casing polished to a mirror finish, the bullet tip painted red. Tracer round, Jap said. Odd for a suicide. Or for a murder, Poirot replied. He lifted the box. 11 cartridges remained where 12 should have been. Someone removed one ordinary round and substituted this. Why? Before Jap could answer, Captain Marcus appeared in the doorway, unshaven and still in evening dress. Found something, he announced, holding up a small key tied with red ribbon. In the billiard room, under the cushion of the scoring chair. Fits the gun room door. Poirot's eyes narrowed. You searched at dawn, Capitaine? Most diligent. Marcus flushed. Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd rack the balls again. Clear my head. The key was just there. He tossed it to Jap, who caught it neatly. Duplicate key, Jap said. Changes everything. Someone could have locked the door from outside after bolting it from within. Non, Poirot said softly. The bolt is on the inside only. A key locks the door, but cannot throw the bolt. Yet this key is interesting. He examined it closely. The bow was engraved with a tiny crest, a lion rampant, the Ashbrook arms, identical to the one in Sir Reginald's pocket. But observe, the wards are worn. This key has been used frequently. Miss Vale entered next, carrying a tray of coffee that trembled slightly in her hands. Mrs. Graves thought you might need sustenance, she said. Her eyes were red-rimmed. The green dress had been replaced by severe navy. I also found this. She produced a scrap of burnt paper from her pocket. In the morning-room grate, I was cleaning the ashes. Poirot took the fragment delicately. Charred edges, but legible. No disinherit unless immediate payment. The handwriting was Sir Reginald's, angular, impatient. The previous will, Poirot murmured. Burned, you said. Yet this survives. I burned the entire document, Miss Vale insisted. Page by page. This must be a corner that escaped. Dr. Harrow followed, clutching his black bag like a talisman. I've examined the body thoroughly, he announced. Rigor beginning in the jaw. Time of death between 11 and 11:15. The cyanide capsule is definitely prussic acid, enough to kill in 90 seconds. Poirot turned to him. And your dispensary, doctor? You were preparing digitalis. May we see? Harrow hesitated, then led them down a narrow corridor to a small room that smelled of carbolic and camphor. Shelves lined with bottles gleamed in the morning light. A mortar and pestle sat on a bench. Beside it a glass phial, half filled with clear liquid. Harrow lifted it. Digitalis tincture. Sir Reginald took 30 drops nightly. Poirot uncorked the phial and sniffed. Digitalis has no odor. Yet this... He touched a drop to his tongue and grimaced. Bitter almonds. Cyanide, doctor. You have poisoned the heart medicine. Harrow went white. Impossible. I prepared it myself. From the same stock as the capsule? Poirot's voice was silk over steel. We shall test both, and your fingerprints, I think, will be on the phial. Lady Eleanor appeared in the doorway, regal in dove-grey mourning. There is more, she said. In my husband's study. A letter arrived by the morning post. She handed Poirot a thick envelope. The paper was heavy, expensive. Inside, a single sheet. Reginald. The discrepancies are proven. Return the 27,000 by noon tomorrow, or face exposure. The evidence is with my solicitor. P.F. Mr. Finch, Poirot said quietly. You wrote this? Finch, who had been hovering in the corridor, pushed forward. A bluff! Reginald was paranoid. Those funds were legitimate war profits, embezzled from the Ministry of Munitions. Poirot finished. You needed the money. Sir Reginald refused. You threatened exposure unless he paid. Mrs. Graves entered last, carrying a small wooden box. Found this in the attic, sir, above the gun room. She opened it to reveal a coil of fishing line identical to the one from the ceiling hatch, and a brass pulley still warm to the touch. The hatch was nailed shut from this side. Someone prized the nails out, then replaced them loosely. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The attic. Of course. The ceiling panel opens into the space above. But the nails, he examined them. New brass, not rusted, replaced after the crime. Japp scratched his head again. So the killer went through the attic, dropped into the gunroom, shot Sir Reginald, then climbed back up and nailed the hatch shut. But the fishing line was for the revolver, Poirot said, attached to the trigger, run through the pulley, then to the desk drawer. When Sir Reginald opened the drawer for his will, bang, the killer below pulled the line, fired the gun, then retrieved it through the hatch. Captain Marcus laughed harshly. Clever, but the door was bolted, the key in Father's pocket. How did the killer lock it from outside? Poirot smiled. That, mon capitaine, is the red herring. The door was never bolted from the inside by Sir Reginald. The killer bolted it after the murder, using the attic hatch to reach the bolt. The fishing line was threaded through a tiny hole drilled in the door. He pointed to a fresh pinprick in the oak, then withdrawn. The key in the pocket, placed there post-mortem. He turned to the suspects. Each of you has lied. Lady Eleanor, you were not in the drawing room. Carstairs saw you in the west wing at 11. Captain Marcus, the billiard balls were not touched. The cue-chalk is undisturbed. Monsieur Finch, your letter proves motive. Dr. Harrow, the cyanide in the digitalis is your doing. Mademoiselle Vale, the burned will fragment is too convenient. Madame Graves, the attic box is planted evidence. Silence fell, broken only by the ticking of the library clock. Poirot continued, but the true clue is the tracer bullet, painted red, visible in darkness. The killer needed to see the trajectory. The revolver was fired twice. The first shot, the tracer, embedded in the chandelier crystal, deflecting the second shot into Sir Reginald's temple. The crystal was removed, the hole filled with plaster, but the deflection left a microscopic chip. He produced a tiny glass sliver from his waistcoat. Found in the wound, the chandelier was the true weapon. The fishing line triggered a spring mechanism hidden in the crystal. The revolver was a distraction. Japp stared. But who? All of you, Poirot said softly. A conspiracy. Lady Eleanor provided the motive. Captain Marcus, the duplicate key. Mr. Finch, the funds. Dr. Harrow, the cyanide distraction. Miss Vale, the burned will. Mrs. Graves, the attic access. Together, you created the perfect impossible crime. Lady Eleanor laughed, a sound like breaking ice. Prove it, little man. Poirot's smile was gentle. I already have. The fishing line has traces of your perfume, madame. The tracer bullet was loaded by someone who shoots left-handed. Captain Marcus. The plaster in the chandelier matches the attic dust on Mrs. Graves's apron. The cyanide file bears Dr. Harrow's thumbprint. The burned fragment has Miss Vale's typewriter ribbon ink, and Mr. Finch. He held up the threatening letter. Your solicitor never received the evidence. It is in your briefcase. He opened Finch's case. Inside, bundles of banknotes, a second revolver, and a detailed diagram of the chandelier mechanism. The room erupted. Captain Marcus lunged for the door. Japp's constables restrained him. Lady Eleanor fainted into a chair. Dr. Harrow began to weep. Miss Vale's pencil clattered to the floor. Mrs. Graves stood motionless, hymn-book face finally cracked. Poirot surveyed the chaos with satisfaction. The red herrings were many. The truth was simple, a conspiracy of greed perfectly planned until Hercule Poirot arrived. Chapter 5. Complications and Twists. The library at Ashbrook House had never felt smaller. 6 suspects sat in a semicircle of wing chairs, hemmed in by the dark spines of unread books and the heavier weight of Poirot's certainty. Inspector Japp stood at the door, arms folded, while 2 constables blocked the only exit. Rain had returned, softer now, tapping the tall windows like a code no one wanted to decipher. Poirot stood before the fireplace, the chandelier crystal chip glittering between his gloved fingers like a drop of frozen blood. Order, he said quietly, and the room obeyed. We have the mechanism, the motive, the fingerprints of complicity, yet something troubles Hercule Poirot. A conspiracy of 6 is elegant in theory, impossible in practice. One mind planned, the others followed. Who was the architect? He began with the chandelier itself. At his signal, Japp produced a stepladder. Poirot climbed, nimble as a squirrel, and unscrewed the central crystal cluster. Inside the brass housing lay a delicate spring-loaded piston, no longer than a cigar, connected to a hairpin trigger. A length of fishing line ran from the trigger through a minute hole drilled in the ceiling rose. "Beautiful," Poirot murmured. The line descends through the ceiling hatch, loops around the revolver trigger, then returns upward. When the drawer is opened, snap, the pistol fires upward into the chandelier. The tracer bullet ricochets into the temple. The ordinary bullet, fired moments later from the Webley on the desk, masks the true wound. The killer retrieves the line, closes the hatch, and departs through the attic. The nails are replaced loosely, enough to hold until discovery. Captain Marcus shifted in his chair. Clever. But the revolver was in Father's hand, the bolt thrown, the key in his pocket. You said yourself the attic hatch was nailed from above. Poirot descended the ladder. A complication. The nails were new brass, yes, but one was bent, prized out and reinserted carelessly. Someone returned to the attic after the murder. To retrieve the fishing line? Non. The line was cut flush with the ceiling rose. Someone returned to plant evidence. He produced the wooden box Mrs. Graves had found in the attic. Inside, fishing line, pulley, and a single bent nail. This box was placed deliberately. The pulley is tarnished, unused for years. The line is silk, not gut, modern, bought in Piccadilly last week. A red herring to suggest attic entry, but the true entry was elsewhere. Dr. Harrow found his voice. The chimney? Impossible. I measured it myself. 8 inches square. Poirot smiled. The chimney is a distraction. Observe. He moved to the gunroom door, still splintered from Marcus's assault. The bolt is on the inside, yes, but the door frame, he ran a finger along the jamb, is oak, 2 inches thick, yet here a hairline crack. The wood has been sawn almost through, then glued. A push from the corridor side would snap the bolt free, allowing the door to open inward. The killer entered, shot Sir Reginald, placed the revolver in his hand, threw the bolt, and exited. The glued frame held until Captain Marcus's shoulder provided the necessary force. Lady Eleanor's rosary clicked once, sharply. You accuse us of sawing the door frame? When? The corridor is trafficked all day. Between 10:45 and 11, Poirot said. Mademoiselle Vale delivered coffee. She left the door ajar, her own testimony. In those minutes the frame was prepared. The glue, carpenter's glue, still tacky when I examined it, takes 30 minutes to set. The killer waited in the corridor, hidden behind the suit of armor. When Sir Reginald bolted the door at 10:55, the trap was sprung. Miss Vale's pencil snapped in her fingers. I left the coffee and returned to the morning room. I heard nothing. You heard the clock strike 11, Poirot said, but the morning room is at the far end of the west wing. The armor is directly opposite the gunroom. Sound carries oddly in these old houses. You heard what you expected to hear. Mr. Finch mopped his brow. This is fantasy. The key in Reginald's pocket was placed there after death, Poirot interrupted. The duplicate key, the one Captain Marcus found in the billiard room, unlocked the door from outside. The original key was removed, wiped of prints, and returned to the pocket, but the killer made a mistake. He held up the blood-flecked key, a single smear on the bow, not Sir Reginald's blood. Typo, his was type A, as Dr. Harrow's post-mortem confirms. The smear is type AB, rare. Only one person in this house has type AB blood. He turned to Mrs. Graves. The housekeeper's face remained impassive, but her hands clenched in her lap. You, madame, you entered the gun-room after the murder to adjust the scene. You wiped the key, but a drop of your own blood, perhaps from a cut finger, transferred to the metal. You replaced the key, threw the bolt, and exited through the sawn frame. The glue held until morning. Mrs. Graves spoke for the first time, her voice steady. You have no proof? I have the glue pot, Poirot said. Found in the still room, still warm at midnight. Your apron bears traces of sawdust, oak, matching the door frame, and your son, the chauffeur, he drove to Piccadilly on Tuesday to purchase the silk fishing line. The shopkeeper remembers a woman in black bombazine. Captain Marcus surged to his feet. Graves? The housekeeper? She's been with the family 30 years. Precisely, Poirot said. long enough to know every secret, long enough to hate. Her son was dismissed for theft, yes, but also for assaulting Miss Vale. Sir Reginald covered it up to protect the family name. Mrs. Graves never forgave him. She planned the perfect crime, a locked room, a suicide note, a conspiracy to confuse. But she needed accomplices. He turned to the others. Lady Eleanor provided the motive, disinheritance, Captain Marcus the duplicate key, Mr. Finch the funds to buy silence, Dr. Harrow the cyanide distraction, Miss Vale the burned will fragment. Each of you played your part, believing the others guilty. Mrs. Graves orchestrated all. Dr. Harrow laughed bitterly. And the chandelier mechanism? A blind, Poirot said, built by Mrs. Graves's brother, a clockmaker in Clerkenwell. The fishing line was to suggest attic entry, the tracer bullet to suggest ricochet, but the true weapon was the Webley, fired at close range after Sir Reginald was unconscious. Drugged by the digitalis laced with sedative, not cyanide, he produced the digitalis phial, laudanum, not prussic acid, enough to render him insensible. The cyanide capsule was planted to suggest suicide. The bitter almond smell? Oil of almonds dripped onto the carpet from Mrs. Graves's still-room stores. Lady Eleanor stood, regal even in defeat. You cannot prove this fantasia. I can, Poirot said. The sawdust on Mrs. Graves's apron matches the door frame. The glue pot bears her thumbprint. The shopkeeper in Piccadilly has identified her, and the bent nail, he held it up, has a speck of green paint, matching the paint on the attic hatch, applied last month when Mrs. Graves supervised repairs. She pried the nail, entered the attic to plant the box, then returned to the corridor to adjust the key. Silence fell, broken only by the rain. Mrs. Graves rose slowly. He ruined my son, she said simply. 30 years of service, and he cast him out like refuse. I planned for a year. The others, they were tools. Greed made them pliable. Captain Marcus stared at her. You used us. I used your weaknesses, she corrected, as your father used mine. Japp stepped forward, handcuffs ready. Mrs. Graves, I arrest you for the murder of Sir Reginald Ashbrook. She moved with startling speed. From her bombazine sleeve slid a small derringer, its barrel steady on Poirot's heart. One step, and the little man dies. The room froze. Poirot's eyes never left hers. You will not shoot, madam. You are not a fool. The house is surrounded. Your son waits in the stables. He will confess to protect you. Put down the weapon. For a moment, the derringer wavered. Then, with a sigh like a breaking wave, Mrs. Graves let it fall. The constables seized her. Lady Eleanor sank into her chair, rosary forgotten. The others sat stunned, their conspiracy unraveled by the one person they had trusted most. Poirot picked up the derringer. A final twist, he said softly. The housekeeper, not the heirs. The locked room was never locked, only glued. The impossible crime was possible because the impossible was a lie. Outside, the rain ceased. A watery sun broke through, gilding the library in pale gold. Inside, the secrets of Ashbrook House lay exposed, and Hercule Poirot permitted himself a small, satisfied sigh. The complications were many. The truth, as always, was simple. Chapter 6. The Revelation. The grand hall of Ashbrook House had been transformed into a courtroom without a jury. Afternoon sunlight slanted through the stained glass skylight, painting the marble floor in blood red and corpse blue. The 6 suspects sat in a row on gilt chairs dragged from the drawing room, their faces pale as the ghosts that surely haunted the corridors. Inspector Japp stood at Poirot's left, notebook open, pencil poised. 2 constables flanked the doors. Mrs. Graves, bombazine stripped away, wrists in steel, stood alone before the portrait of Sir Reginald, as though awaiting judgment from the painted eyes above. Poirot took the center of the floor, small and immaculate, his patent leather shoes reflecting the colored light like drops of oil. He held no notes. The little gray cells needed none. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost conversational, yet every syllable carried to the furthest corner. Mesdames et messieurs, the time for shadows is ended. We have chased red herrings through attics and chimneys, through glued door frames and chandelier mechanisms. Each was clever, each was false. The truth is simpler and more terrible. Sir Reginald Ashbrook was murdered in a room locked from the inside by a killer who vanished like smoke, yet smoke leaves soot, and the soot leads us to one person. He turned to Mrs. Graves. You, madame. A collective intake of breath. Captain Marcus half rose, then sank back. Lady Eleanor's rosary slipped from her fingers and clattered on the marble. Dr. Harrow stared as though seeing the housekeeper for the first time. Poirot continued, Let us reconstruct the crime step by step with the precision of a Swiss watch. At 10:45, Mademoiselle Vale delivers coffee. The door is left ajar. Her testimony. In those 3 minutes, you, Mrs. Graves, saw the door frame with a fine-toothed saw concealed in your apron. You apply carpenter's glue to the cut, still tacky when I examined it. You retreat behind the suit of armor opposite. At 10:55, Sir Reginald opens the door a crack, orders everyone away, and slides the bolt. The glue holds. The trap is set. He paced slowly. You wait. The household disperses. At 11 o'clock you push the door. The glued frame snaps silently. The bolt appears thrown but is not. You enter. Sir Reginald is at his desk, writing the new will. You have prepared the digitalis, 30 drops laced with laudanum from your still-room stores. You offer it as his evening dose. He drinks, trusting you after 30 years. Within minutes he is unconscious. Mrs. Graves's eyes never left Poirot's. Fantasy, she said flatly. Fact, Poirot replied. The laudanum bottle in the still room is half empty. Your fingerprints are on it. The digitalis file contains traces of opium. Sir Reginald's pupils were dilated. Post-mortem confirmation. He produced the file from his pocket, held it to the light. You place the Webley in his right hand, knowing he is left-handed. You fire into his temple. The powder burns or contact. Your glove leaves no print. You wipe the revolver, press his fingers to the grip. You place the typed suicide note, composed on the morning room typewriter, the E misaligned. You take the original key from his pocket, lock the door from outside with the duplicate, then slide the original key back through the letter slot. Cut wider, last month when you repaired the door. The key lands in his pocket as he slumps forward. Captain Marcus found his voice. The letter slot is 6 inches up. The key would fall to the floor. Non, Poirot said. You forget the fishing line. A loop around the key, threaded through the slot, lowered gently into the pocket. The line is withdrawn, cut flush. The silk fishing line, bought by your son in Piccadilly. The shopkeeper's description matches you, madame, though you wore a veil. He turned to the others. The red herrings were your insurance. Lady Eleanor's rosary beads scattered to suggest panic. Captain Marcus's found duplicate key to suggest outside entry. Mr. Finch's threatening letter to suggest blackmail. Dr. Harrow's cyanide capsule to suggest suicide. Miss Vale's burned will fragment to suggest inheritance motive. The attic box, the chandelier mechanism, the sawn frame, all planted by you in the night using the servant's stare. You even dripped oil of bitter almonds on the carpet to mimic cyanide. Dr. Harrow stood. The chandelier piston, built by your brother the clockmaker, Poirot said, but never used. The tracer bullet was fired into the ceiling rose to create the ricochet illusion. The crystal chip in the wound, planted. The real bullet entered straight. The spring mechanism was a decoy triggered by a separate line you cut away. He moved to the suit of armor in the corridor, opened the visor. Inside, a coil of silk line, a small pot of glue, a fine saw blade. Your hiding place. The armor was moved 3 inches. Last week, scratches on the floor. You worked at night when the household slept. Mrs. Graves smiled, thin, wintry. You have no proof I fired the shot. I have the glove, Poirot said. He produced a black kid glove from his pocket, the right index finger stained with cordite. Found in the still-room laundry basket, your size. The cordite matches the Webley, and the blood on the key, type AB, yours. Silence. Then Lady Eleanor spoke, voice trembling. Why? 30 years. My son, Mrs. Graves said simply. Reginald dismissed him for theft, but the truth, he assaulted Daphne. Reginald paid to silence it. My boy took the blame. He hangs himself in Dartmoor last Michaelmas. Reginald laughed, said it was justice. I planned for a year. The locked room was my gift to him, death in his sanctuary, with every door barred against help. Captain Marcus lunged. You bitch! Japp restrained him. Poirot raised a hand. One final detail. The shadow I saw beneath the door at 10:50. Not you, madam. Your reflection in the polished floor, cast by the desk lamp when you tested the glued frame. The scuff mark, your shoe, entering but not leaving, because you never left the corridor until after the murder. He turned to Jap. The glue pot, the laudanum bottle, the fishing line, the glove, the saw blade, all in the still room, marked with her prints. The shopkeeper will identify her. Her son's suicide note, found in her room, name Sir Reginald. The case is complete. Mrs. Graves looked up at the portrait. He ruined my child. I ruined his legacy. The perfect crime. Poirot's voice was gentle. No crime is perfect, madame. Only the criminal's vanity. Jap stepped forward. Mrs. Graves, I arrest you for the murder of Sir Reginald Ashbrook. You will hang. She did not resist as the handcuffs clicked. The others sat stunned, their own complicity exposed as pawns in a dead woman's revenge. Lady Eleanor wept silently. Captain Marcus stared at the floor. Dr. Harrow's hands shook. Miss Vale's notebook lay forgotten. Mr. Finch's briefcase, now empty of incriminating diagrams, stood open like a confession. Poirot addressed them. You were not murderers, but accessories. You planted evidence, lied, obstructed. The law will decide your fate, but remember, greed blinded you to the serpent in your midst. He turned to the portrait. Sir Reginald sought control even in death. He summoned Poirot to witness his suicide. Instead, he became the victim of a greater control, hatred, patient and cold. Outside, the sun dipped toward the heath, gilding the yew hedges in fire. Inside, the grand hall emptied slowly. Suspects led away, constables murmuring, Jap barking orders. Poirot lingered beneath the portrait, adjusting his tie in the reflection of a suit of armor. The locked room, he murmured, was never the door. It was the heart, and the key was vengeance. He tipped his hat to the painted eyes above, turned and walked into the fading light. The case was closed. The little gray cells rested. Chapter 7. Justice Served. The Old Bailey courtroom smelled of beeswax, old paper, and the faint metallic tang of fear. October light filtered through high windows, striping the dock where Mrs. Graves stood in black bombazine, her face as unyielding as the oak panels behind her. The public gallery was packed, society ladies in furs, reporters with notebooks poised like bayonets, and a cluster of Ashbrook servants in their Sunday best, eyes fixed on the woman who had ruled their lives for 3 decades. Poirot sat in the witness box, small and immaculate, his answers crisp as frost under the barrister's cross-examination. Mr. Poirot, Sir Reginald's counsel thundered, you ask us to believe a housekeeper, a woman of 60, engineered a murder so complex it baffled Scotland Yard, a locked room, a vanishing killer, a conspiracy of red herrings? Come now. Poirot's mustaches twitched. I ask you to believe the evidence, monsieur. The glue on the door frame, tested by your own expert. The laudanum in the digitalis file, confirmed by the Home Office analyst. The fishing line purchased in Piccadilly, shopkeeper's sworn statement. The glove with cordite on the trigger finger, Mrs. Graves's size, her initials embroidered inside. And the letter from her son, found in her room. Mother, he laughed when I begged. End it. The evidence does not lie. Only people do. The jury, 12 sober Londoners, leaned forward as Poirot recounted the timeline with the precision of a metronome. 10:45, coffee delivered, door ajar. 10:48, frame sawn, glue applied. 10:55, bolt thrown, trap set. 11 o'clock, door pushed open, digitalis administered. 11:05, shot fired, key returned via letter slot. 11:10, Mrs. Graves in the corridor wiping the revolver with her apron. 11:15, the household gathers, the glue holds until force is applied. Mrs. Graves's defense counsel, a thin man with a voice like vinegar, tried to paint her as a tragic figure driven mad by grief. A mother's love, Malud. Her son hanged himself because of Sir Reginald's cruelty. She acted in a moment of insanity. Poirot shook his head. Insanity does not saw door frames at precise angles. Insanity does not plant tracer bullets to suggest ricochet. Insanity does not forge suicide notes on a typewriter with a misaligned E. This was calculation, cold and patient. 30 years of service gave her every key, every secret passage, every heartbeat of the house. The jury retired for only 43 minutes. When they returned, the foreman's voice rang clear. Guilty. The judge donned the black cap. Mrs. Graves received the sentence without flinching. Death by hanging, to be carried out at Holloway in 3 weeks' time. Outside the courtroom, the rain had returned, soft and relentless. Reporters swarmed Poirot on the steps, umbrellas bobbing like black mushrooms. Will she appeal? Was there really a conspiracy? What of the heirs? Poirot raised a gloved hand. The appeal is to a higher court. The conspiracy was real, but only as tools in a master's hand. The heirs? He glanced back at the Old Bailey's grim facade. They will face charges of perjury and obstruction. Justice is not blind. She sees clearly, even through locked doors. Back at Ashbrook House, the atmosphere was funereal. The great hall stood empty save for dust sheets and the echo of footsteps. Lady Eleanor had retreated to her sister's estate in Devon, the rosary replaced by a bottle of laudanum, prescribed this time by a doctor who asked no questions. Captain Marcus had sold his commission and booked passage to Kenya, the Webley revolver left on the gunroom desk with a note, for the next fool who thinks he can outrun his debts. Dr. Harrow's medical license was revoked. He vanished into the anonymity of the East End, treating dock workers for gin blossoms and broken dreams. Miss Vale took a secretarial post in Toronto, her shorthand notebook filled with letters she would never send. Mr. Finch faced bankruptcy. His briefcase, once stuffed with incriminating diagrams, now held only unpaid bills and a one-way ticket to Buenos Aires. The house itself was to be sold. Auctioneers catalogued the weapons collection. The Zulu assegai fetched $120, the Maxim gun $350. The Webley revolver, now evidence, remained in Scotland Yard's vaults. The chandelier was dismantled, its brass sold for scrap. The ceiling hatch was sealed with fresh plaster, the doorframe replaced with solid oak. The locked room became legend whispered over brandy in London clubs. Ashbrook House, where the impossible happened and a housekeeper hanged for it. Poirot returned one final time at the request of the estate's solicitors. He stood in the gunroom, now stripped bare, sunlight streaming through unbarred windows. The desk was gone. The carpet rolled up, the walls echoing. He placed a single white camellia on the spot where Sir Reginald had died. You sought control, mon ami, he murmured to the empty air. You summoned Poirot to witness your triumph over death. Instead, you became its victim. The little gray cells do not respect wealth or rank. They respect only truth. He turned to leave, then paused. On the mantelpiece, missed by the auctioneers, lay a small brass cartridge case, the primer struck but empty. Poirot picked it up, rolling it between his fingers. The misfire from the night of the murder. He slipped it into his pocket. Outside, the yew hedges had been trimmed to severe perfection, the gravel raked smooth. The Daimler that had collected him from Victoria Station waited at the porte-cochere, its chauffeur, Mrs. Graves's son, released on parole, standing stiffly beside it. The young man's eyes were hollow, his hands trembling. You will drive me to the station, Poirot said gently. Then you will start again. Your mother's crime was hers, not yours. The drive was silent. London slid past. Omnibuses, flower sellers, a newsboy shouting headlines about the trial. At Victoria, Poirot tipped his hat. Courage, mon gars. The past is a locked room. Do not live in it. He boarded the boat train for Dover, the white camellia in his buttonhole, the brass cartridge in his waistcoat. In the dining car, he ordered tisane and opened his Morocco notebook to a fresh page. At the top he wrote, Case closed, lessons. 1. Never underestimate the servant. 2. Grief is patient. 3. The perfect crime is never perfect, only the criminal's vanity. The train pulled out, steam billowing like incense. Poirot sipped his tisane and watched London recede. Somewhere behind him, Ashbrook House stood empty, its secrets sealed in plaster and oak. Ahead lay the Channel, then Brussels, then a new case, perhaps a poisoning in a Parisian pension or a theft at the Ritz. He closed the notebook. Justice had been served, cold and precise as a guillotine. Mrs. Graves would hang at dawn in 3 weeks' time, her bombazine replaced by a shroud. The heirs would scatter, their fortunes diminished, their names tainted. The locked room would fade into legend, retold in drawing rooms and dockside pubs until the details blurred and only the mystery remained. Chapter 8. Epilogue. Poirot's Reflection. The Orient Express glided eastward through the Tyrolean Alps, its wheels singing a lullaby of steel on steel. Snow-capped peaks rose like cathedral spires beyond the frosted windows of the dining car, and the air inside was warm with the scent of coffee, cigar smoke, and the faint sweetness of sachertorte. Hercule Poirot sat alone at a corner table, a cup of tisane steaming before him, his small leather notebook open to a blank page. The white camellia from Ashbrook House had wilted in his buttonhole, its petals curled like secrets too long kept. He removed it gently, placed it between the pages of the notebook, and closed the cover with a soft snap. The case was finished, yet it lingered in his mind like a melody one cannot shake. He had solved greater puzzles, murders on this very train, poisonings in Mesopotamian deserts, thefts in the shadow of the Sphinx, but the Ashbrook affair possessed a peculiar intimacy, a house, a family, a woman who had served for 30 years and hated for 15, a locked room that was never truly locked, only glued by vengeance. He sipped his tisane and allowed the little gray cells to wander. Mrs. Graves had hanged at dawn, as scheduled. The newspapers reported it with restrained sensationalism. Housekeeper's revenge ends at Holloway. A grainy photograph showed her ascending the scaffold steps, face calm, bombazine replaced by coarse prison garb. Poirot had not attended. Executions were not his métier. Justice was a machine, precise and impersonal. He preferred the moment of revelation when the mask slipped and the soul stood naked. He paused, pen hovering. Outside, the train plunged into a tunnel. Darkness swallowed the carriage, and for a moment the only light was the green-shaded lamp above his table. In the glass he saw his reflection, mustaches perfect, eyes bright, the face of a man who had looked into the abyss and found it orderly. The other suspects had scattered like leaves in an autumn gale. Lady Eleanor, stripped of her allowance, had taken vows at a convent in Bruges. The rosary she once clutched for show now counted genuine penitence. Captain Marcus had reached Mombasa, where rumors placed him guiding safaris for wealthy Americans, the Webley replaced by a Holland and Holland rifle. Dr. Harrow's body was found in the Thames, an empty laudanum bottle in his pocket. Suicide or accident, the coroner could not say. Miss Vale's letters from Toronto spoke of maple trees and a quiet life. The shorthand notebook had been burned. Mr. Finch was last seen boarding a tramp steamer in Marseille, bound for nowhere in particular. Ashbrook House itself had been purchased by a manufacturer of wireless sets. The gun room became a showroom, its walls stripped of weapons, the ceiling hatch plastered over forever. The yew hedges were uprooted for a rose garden. Only the portrait of Sir Reginald remained, relegated to an attic, eyes staring into darkness. Poirot turned to a fresh page. The locked room fallacy. We assume the door is the barrier. In truth, the barrier is assumption. The bolt, the bars, the key, all are symbols. The true lock is the mind that believes them absolute. Mrs. Graves understood this. She glued the frame, sawed the wood, threaded the fishing line through the letter slot. She created impossibility by exploiting certainty. He underlined the final sentence twice. The train emerged from the tunnel into blinding snowlight. A waiter approached with a silver pot. More tisane, monsieur? Non, merci. A cognac, perhaps. Rémy Martin. A small indulgence. The case was closed. The cells deserved a reward. As the cognac arrived, amber and fragrant, Poirot's thoughts drifted to the brass cartridge case in his waistcoat pocket. The misfire. He had kept it as a reminder. Every plan has a flaw, every mechanism a weakness. Mrs. Graves had overlooked the glue's setting time, the fishing line's silk sheen, the blood on the key. Small things, but Hercule Poirot lived in the small things. He raised the glass to the window, where the Alps marched past like white-robed monks. "To you, Sir Reginald," he murmured, "you sought to stage your death as theatre. Instead, you became the villain in another's tragedy. And to you, Mrs. Graves, may your soul find the peace your son did not." The cognac burned pleasantly. He set the glass down and reopened the notebook. Final note: the impossible crime is never impossible. It is merely a crime that has not yet been understood. The detective's task is not to unlock the door, but to see that the door was never locked at all. He closed the book, tucked it into his valise, and leaned back against the velvet banquette. The Orient Express rocked gently, carrying him toward Istanbul and whatever mysteries awaited in the bazaars and back alleys of the Golden Horn. The snow fell thicker now, erasing the tracks behind. Ashbrook House, the locked room, the woman in bombazine, all receded into memory, neatly filed like the camellia between the pages. Chapter 9. Behind the Clues. The studio lights dimmed to a single amber spot, the kind that makes every viewer lean closer to the screen. A velvet armchair, Poirot's own, shipped from his Whitehaven mansion's flat, sat center stage. Behind it, a green baize board displayed the gunroom floor plan, red yarn crisscrossing like arteries. I, Alistair Gray, stepped into the light, wearing a charcoal three-piece and the faintest smile. The camera dollied in slow, deliberate, the way Poirot himself would approve. "Good evening again, detectives," I began, voice low, almost conspiratorial. "You've sat with us through 90 minutes of fog, thunder, and impossible murder. Now before we close the case file, let's linger in the gun room one last time. Not for drama, for dissection. Pull up the replay, pause at every clue, and see how Christie's rules bend without breaking. We'll use the original 1927 evidence, no modern forensics, just torchlight, logic, and the little gray cells." I lifted the first artifact from a felt-lined tray, the brass cartridge case, primer struck but empty. Chapter 2, 1140. Poirot finds this under the desk. Jap calls it a misfire. Wrong. Count the rounds in the Webley, 6 chambers, 1 fired into Sir Reginald, 5 left in the cylinder. This empty case was ejected manually. Someone cycled the action twice. Why? To plant doubt. If the gun held 6, fired 1, 5 remain. Simple. But an extra empty case whispers, second weapon. Red herring number 1, planted by Mrs. Graves in the 10 seconds she lingered after sliding the key through the letter slot. I pinned the cartridge to the board with a brass tack. The yarn snapped taut. Next, the fishing line. I unspooled a length of modern silk, identical gauge to the 1927 original, and threaded it through a miniature brass pulley. Chapter 3. Poirot finds this in the ceiling hatch. We assumed attic entry. False. The hatch was nailed from above, yes, but the nails were new, unbending. Mrs. Graves pried them loose at midnight, dropped the coil and pulley as theater, then rehammered. The real line, gut not silk, ran through the letter slot, looped the key, lowered it into the pocket. Silk would gleam under torchlight. Gut is invisible. She swapped them after the police arrived. Watch. I flicked off the studio spots. The gut vanished. The silk glowed like a moonlight. A swap any conjurer would envy. The camera zoomed to the doorframe replica, oak, 2 inches thick, a hairline cut filled with amber glue. Chapter 5. Poirot discovers the saw jam. We thought entry. Wrong again. The cut was made before the bolt was thrown. Glue sets in 30 minutes. Mrs. Graves applied it at 10:48, retreated behind the suit of armor. When Sir Reginald bolted at 10:55, the glue was still tacky. At 11, she pushed. The frame flexed. The bolt appeared secure. Captain Marcus's shoulder later snapped it clean. The glue residue, still tacky at discovery, proof the crime was fresh. I tapped the board. Red yarn now formed a perfect hourglass. The cyanide capsule. I held the glass phial to the lens. Unbroken, wax seal intact, yet the room smelled of bitter almonds. Chapter 2. Poirot sniffs. Cyanide? No. Oil of almonds, distilled in the still room, dripped onto the carpet at 11:12. The capsule was a prop. The real sedative was laudanum in the digitalis. 30 drops, therapeutic, 60, coma. Mrs. Graves doubled the dose. The bitter almond oil masked the opium sweetness. 2 birds, 1 drip. A close-up of the Webley revolver, barrel still warm in the archive photograph. Left-handed man, right temple wound, classic misdirection. But observe the powder burns, contact, circular, no stippling. A glove fired the shot. The glove, black kid, cordite on the index finger, was laundered but not destroyed. Starch from Mrs. Graves's ironing board preserved the residue. The revolver in Sir Reginald's hand, post-mortem placement. Rigor had not set, the fingers were posed. I pinned the glove beside the yarn, the pattern tightened. The duplicate key, I dangled it by its red ribbon. Chapter 4, Captain Marcus finds it in the billiard room, planted at 3 a.m. by Mrs. Graves. Cue chalk undisturbed, ribbon still creased from her pocket. The original key, blood-flecked, type AB, was returned via the letter slot on gut line. The blood, a paper cut on Mrs. Graves's thumb, earned while slicing the suicide note from the typewriter platen. One drop transferred to the keybow. DNA wasn't dreamed of in 1927, but blood typing was. Poirot sent samples to the yard. Match. The board was nearly filled. One space remained. Finally, the chandelier mechanism. I lifted the brass piston, no longer than a cigar. Chapter 5. We thought ricochet. False. The tracer bullet, red tip, was fired into the ceiling rose to create a visible spark, suggesting deflection. The ordinary bullet entered straight. The piston? A decoy built by Mrs. Graves's clockmaker brother, triggered by a separate line-cut flush. The crystal chip in the wound? Planted. The real wound was clean. The mechanism's purpose, to draw eyes upward, away from the door. I pinned the piston. The yarn formed a perfect star. Timeline, I said, stepping back. The camera panned the board. 10:45, coffee, door ajar, frame sawn. 10:48, glue applied. 10:55, bolt thrown. 11, digitalis with laudanum. 11:05, shot, key returned via slot. 11:10, almond oil dripped. 11:12, glove wiped, revolver posed. 11:15, household gathers. Midnight, attic box planted. 3 a.m., duplicate key placed. Every move rehearsed for a year. Chapter 10. Community and subscribe. The amber spotlight softened to a warm hearth glow. The crime board slid away on silent casters, replaced by a single leather wing chair and a small table holding a steaming cup of cocoa and the wilted white camellia from Ashbrook House. I settled into the chair, loosened my tie just enough to feel human again, and looked straight down the lens the way Poirot looks at a nervous suspect, gently but without letting you escape. 97 minutes, I said, letting the number hang in the air like pipe smoke. Some of you have been here since the very first fog rolled across Victoria Station. Others joined late and are now frantically scrolling back to see what the devil that fishing line business was about. Either way, you stayed. You argued in the comments about who sawed the door frame. You paused the video at chapter 6 when Poirot said, "The glue is still tacky," and shouted at your screen. You made this locked room feel alive again. And for that, I am genuinely grateful. I lifted the cocoa, let the steam curl in front of the lens. So let's do what we always do at the end of a long night at Ashbrook House. Talk. I leaned forward. Now, the question you've been typing since chapter 7 ended. Will Mrs. Graves really hang? Historical answer, yes. In 1927, a guilty verdict for murder meant the rope. No royal reprieve came for a housekeeper who killed her baronet employer, no matter how tragic the motive. The black cap went on, the trapdoor opened at 8 o'clock on a cold November morning, and the Ashbrook case passed into the annals beside Crippen and Seddon. Poirot closed the file, drank a final tisane, and took the Orient Express east. Exactly as you saw in the epilogue, but fiction lets us be kinder than history. If you, the jury of tonight, believe 30 years of loyal service and a mother's grief deserve mercy, then in our little world, she received it. Perhaps the Home Secretary commuted the sentence to life. Perhaps she died quietly in Holloway in 1942, tending the prison herb garden and terrifying new inmates with stories of fishing line and glue. That ending is yours to keep. I set the cocoa down and picked up the camellia. Every week I read that you watch these while cooking dinner in Manila, while nursing a baby in Glasgow, while walking the dog in São Paulo, while hiding from your in-laws in Ohio. Some of you put the videos on for your grandparents who knew the 1920s firsthand. Some of you are 12 years old and have never held a fountain pen, yet you now know what a Webley service revolver feels like in the hand. That is why we keep the fog thick and the clocks ticking. I turned the flower so the bruised petals face the camera. This camellia has been to every chapter with us. It's dry now, but if you look very closely, macro lens, please, Tom, You can still see the faint brown stain where Mrs. Graves pressed it against her son's last letter. I'm going to plant it in the garden tomorrow. Next spring, if it blooms, I'll post a photo and we'll know the story has come full circle. I smiled, softer now. Housekeeping, as Mrs. Graves might say. I raise the cocoa in salute. To every one of you who stayed until the very last creak of the gunroom door, you are the real detectives. Poirot would be proud and a little jealous of your collective mustaches.